Welcome to the 2014 guided tour of the Monarch Trail. The Monarch Trail continues to change as development construction progresses. The key areas that have been preserved are still vulnerable to the surrounding changes in topography, plant resources, and changes in wind after the buildings are built. This year, the apartment construction is going to start, a dense amount of buildings between the habitat zone and the Eschweilers. It will certainly change a lot of the area, but once the plants that we've planted are established more, there may be enough to help retain the monarchs. The Department of Transportation is planning to regrade the North Berm this fall, and we've retained it in that when they're done messing it up, we get it back. So that the whole east side is going to stay intact, and we're having it worked on. The Friends Group has actually contracted a company to keep the invasive species out and under control. And then the west side of the berm, when the DOT is done, they're going to reseed all of that. So we will still have the wonderful kind of barrier that the monarchs have used historically. In a few years' time, it should all be back in good shape. Let's see, the other thing is the glen, which is what we used to call this low area between the woods and the berm, used to be a windbreak. You were between two high points, and the monarchs would spend the entire afternoon in this glen feeding on boneset and goldenrod and during the migration, and then they would head into the oak trees. So it was kind of this patch right here that supported the roosts in the oak trees. And we're hoping that when the development is done and everything gets replanted, it will continue to function in that way. And by that time too, maybe everybody's got a butterfly garden and a pollinator garden, and the monarch numbers will start to increase enough so that we can have those spectacular roosts that we once had. I'm going to go up to the next point along here that we turn into the woods, and I'll stop there and give you the next section. But before I do, I'm going to pass around a picture of the butterfly wall that the Department of Transportation put up, and it's actually underneath the bridge. So you'll soon be able to walk between the habitat zone and the Department of Natural Resources woods along this wall. Now, I made them vow that it would not become a memorial wall and that we would continue to have butterflies, but I'll just pass this around and you can see some of the detail that they put into it. We kind of helped design it so that it would have more detail with the wildflowers, the native plants, and butterflies. This is the oak woods, or the oak opening, and we call it that simply because there's kind of a circle of trees with a big open space in the middle. Historically, what I've observed since the late 1900s was monarchs nectaring out in this western side. It was covered with boneset and goldenrod and asters and of course milkweed, and they would be many bouncing on the tops of the white boneset. As soon as the sun would hit the horizon, they would all slowly and quietly come into the middle of this section, and they would land not up at the top but on the lower branches, and it did look like dead leaves. I think Gwen had made reference to that, where you can't even tell when they stop moving. You can't even see them. I would come through and it would be getting very dark, and people would walk their dog or whatever and had no idea what I was looking at. And you have to really look close. But the fascinating part is watching them come in for the night, so to speak. They're coming in from this beautiful sunny meadow where there's all the heavy nectar plants, and then floating in and finding some organized sense of protection under these trees to spend the night. As everybody knows, a migration is simply a movement of many creatures from north to south. Getting big groups of them is not every year. It will depend on the weather. If there is stormy weather, they'll hang out. They'll hang out where there's a nectar source and protection, and the group will get bigger and bigger. But on many years, when the wind continues to be favorable, they'll just keep moving. So you'll get a few, and they'll move on, and then a few more. So you can't ever really predict what a migration's going to do, but higher populations of monarchs is needed for us to see much of anything. And this year, we're hoping, there is that little glimmer of hope that we're going to see more this year in clusters, even small clusters, I think is fascinating. So that is the purpose of protecting this oak woods and protecting the glen and the west side as a nectaring area. So we're going to take a hike up through this wonderful oak woods, and when we get 3/4 of the way, I'm going to have Professor Reinertz maybe describe some of the things that the restoration is going to entail in these beautiful oak woods. Up until last year, for anybody who was on the guided tour last year, this was completely closed up with buckthorn. The stumps on some of those invasive buckthorn plants were huge. And Jim Reinertz and the crew came through and cleared that invasive species out. And it's not a just one-shot deal. You've got to come back and get all the seedlings. And I'll just mention one quick time to Carrie. Last year the buckthorn filled this entire area, and now it's been cleared out so you can actually see the beautiful trees. And Jim Reinertz and his crew are working on here, and I'm going to turn it over to him.
Thanks. Jim Reinertz himself has not done a lot of the cutting of it, but I direct the project.
Absolutely. That's
in fact,
very...
I don't know right here if I've cut a single stem. But yeah, Barb mentioned, in general, our goal, we have a management committee. I work for UWM, and I'm the person that's in charge of what now has an official name, the UWM Monarch Conservancy.
Excellent.
At
Yay!
Innovation Campus. And our goal here is to plant native plant communities, to basically have this entire 11-acre area full of native plant communities. They might not have been the community that was here pre-settlement. It's pretty clear that this right here, pre-settlement, was a deep, dark beech maple forest. But what we have now is these open-grown oaks, which the butterflies love, and they have the perfect structure of something like a little oak savanna. So this committee gets together, Barb's on it, and Mike Merrick with Merrick Landscaping is the one that's being contracted to actually do the work.
Excellent.
And so we have several people on this committee, including Sue Borkin, a butterfly expert at the Milwaukee Public Museum. And we've set out goals for all the different parts of this property, and most of it is prairie, because that's our target species species collectively are the butterflies, not just the monarchs. And for this, we've said, well, we have this structure, so we're going to make this into something like an oak savanna. So the ground layer we'll be planting in here will be typical Wisconsin oak savanna species, which the butterflies will love. It'll include plenty of nectar plants. Along the road here, we have a plan to eventually plant some sort of buffer along there, probably a hedge of shrubs, maybe some more black cherries and some hickories along the road, so that one day when you're in here, you won't see those cars buzzing by.
Excellent. Yep.
It'll be real pretty.
Long-term goals.
And so Barb described that area down there as being full of boneset and all these nectar plants, but something happened between that and when we took over this property, because that area that she described as ugly, to me, is beautiful right now, because it's not 100% teasel, which is what it was a couple of years ago.
It went from
there was
nectar
probably
plants to teasel.
60% of that whole area she was pointing to was solid teasel.
Yep, and that was the work of Merrick getting that back under control.
Right.
So
the first stage of everything we've been doing here has been nothing but killing invasive species. And we feel like in some areas we're starting to get the invasives under a good enough control that we can start to plant the native species back in, and that's what we've done in the prairie up there.
Yep.
But as long as I have all of you here,
Okay.
it's everything is always a balancing act. It's really hard, and right now we're literally trying to balance the current butterflies, the monarchs, against the long-term prospect of planting a really healthy native prairie. And even there's a conflict. We want to leave the nectar plants for the butterflies, but since this is the first year for that prairie planting, honestly, it may have been best for the prairie to literally mow the whole thing. So we have an additional challenge put into our management here, and we think we can do it. We think we can handle it, but everything's a trade-off.
Yeah, I actually think that being that difficult of a challenge, we're doing really well.
Oh,
I think Mike has taken out the invasive patches, left enough of the existing things, and I think it is a perfect balance. So yeah, good job.
So
good job.
That's,
Yeah.
if anybody has any questions about any of the plans here or about specific invasive species as we go, you can just
Can you just
ask me.
comment on how you remove invasive species and keep what you want to keep?
Okay, I'll talk about two sets of them. All the invasive shrubs, we do the same thing. We cut them off to a short stump and apply herbicide to that cut stump. So we're very selective in removing those, and we'll just deal with the seedlings when they get up big enough to cut and put herbicide on the cut stump. It's very selective. With all the biennial problems we have, like teasel is a biennial plant. It grows first year as a rosette, the second year it bolts up and flowers, and it will die after it flowers. So all we have to do with the biennials is keep them from ever setting seed, and eventually we'll wear out that seed bank.
Okay.
And so that's what we've done with the teasel, is when it gets up and flowers, we cut it off low and it doesn't have the energy to flower again, it dies.
The next stop, the North Prairie. Enjoy the woods. We're at a crux in the road here. One way will take you through what we call the Monarch Meadow and back to the sycamore tree. This way comes directly from the kiosk. Our new kiosk is located on Eschweiler Drive, just off of Discovery. You probably saw it when you were driving in. You are welcome to take the trail anytime, parking on Discovery Drive and walking to the kiosk and taking that trail this way. And you can go up into the woods. When the construction begins for the apartments, they will have fencing up, and we always ask that you mind the construction. But the trail part you can still walk. Behind you, you are seeing bioinfiltration systems or stormwater management basins. And they've been planted on the sides with a native plant community, and also on the bottom, which hasn't been quite as successful. We're working real hard to get the establishment and maintenance of those basins so that it does eventually produce wildlife habitat and an extension of the habitat that Jim is working on. I think that more pressure is needed. In the meantime, the North Prairie behind you was seeded last year, the tail end of July. And you would think in July that none of those seeds would have taken, but we had a rain right afterward. It all took, and it actually is very beautiful this year. The Monarch came through and he took out selectively invasive species colonies, and we're hoping that next year it'll look even better. Let's see. We also came out last July and planted many plugs from the pollinator garden that was once in front of the Parks Department where we used to hold our events. So we dug a lot of that up and we put it out here as more established plants. But I think that this is progressing very quickly, and it's beautiful already, but it's going to be more functional and better for monarchs and all of the different butterflies in the next few years. again, for anybody who didn't hear, this other trail takes you back to the kiosk, and it's a kind of a neat walk between the bioinfiltration systems and the prairie, and you can see them juxtaposed as to which is growing better and which isn't. What I'll do now, instead of going all the way around, taking you to the kiosk and back to the sycamore from the other direction, we're going to take this beautiful shortcut over to the sycamore tree, and that is where the whole story began. So next stop is the sycamore.
Is it that cool?
Back in 2005, MMSD was they proposed their basins. They were going to put all the dirt there. This was all destined to be cleared out. But having seen the monarchs roost here, keep coming, we need more room. We described what we saw here and the importance of it, and so they left this circle of trees. Why does this work for the monarchs? There have been people who are monarch experts who have come to this site and known exactly where the monarchs are going to roost, simply because of the arrangement of the trees. There is one single tree in the middle, prominent, with a circle of trees around the outskirts, open to the north. This is a very typical landscape that they seek out. But one of the important factors is all of the nectar plants that are north of it, kind of like a V or a flag or a wave of nectar plants that they follow that draws them in, and then they use this landscape structure to roost at night when it's raining, when it's inclement, whatever. And this has been where I have seen large clusters of monarchs hanging not only in the leaves with the branches with leaves, but also the branches that are completely dead. And like when it had said, they look like dead leaves at the end of summer. So, but the past couple of years, the numbers have been low. Everything's been changed north of here. The basins have not yet recovered. I don't feel the parkland has very much in resources. The prairie is brand new. We have high hopes for the future. But in the meantime, we wait and we hope that this will again be a beautiful gathering place for the monarchs in fall. In the end, we will be remembered not only by what we create, but by what we refuse to destroy. So we're going to continue to protect and enhance. Everybody can do something to help the monarchs by planting milkweed, by understanding it more, visiting the trail, enjoying it, and hopefully we'll all be able to come back in the years to come and see many monarchs roosting again in the UWM Monarch Conservancy. And thank you all for coming.
Barbara, what would you do to preserve this sycamore? Because if he dies, then what would happen?
We're actually going to be planning for another large tree to be planted in the understory in the interim, so that it can be old enough or mature enough when this one does go. They are technically short-lived trees. We have seen images, aerial images from 1939, when there was a building in front of it, another Eschweiler building, and this was behind it. And you can see a tiny little shadow there, so it is that old anyways, and which is probably beyond its genetic duration. Yeah. So we think it's a wonderful tree, and it would have been gone in 2006 had we not stepped up and said something.
Yeah.
You got to speak up.
Yeah.
Yes.
Great. Thank you.
You bet. Thank you. Hi.